Morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, LinkedIn Live. We're live. It's Friday. Oh, it's been a long week. Danielle, we were just saying offline, right? You were saying that weeks are so busy that you blink and then it's Friday.
Literally, I can't believe the weeks have gone. I can say to the team, like, see you later, have a great weekend. And it's like, what? How did that happen? It's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Busy.
Yeah. So good morning, Danielle. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday morning, because I know that you guys are incredibly busy. You know the amazing work that you do, etc. So thank you so much. Anybody that doesn't know Danielle Bridge, please do connect on LinkedIn and follow her work and the work of Black Minds Matter. So Danielle is CEO of Black Minds Matter UK. Um, Interestingly, so your background, I was like having a bit of a stalk as you do through your background. So your background is very much around first aid training, both physical and then also mental health first aid training. So just tell us maybe a little bit about how you got into that, how and why the whole sort of like first aid thing.
Yeah, so first of all, first aid, because I think I wanted to be a doctor, but I wasn't prepared to do the work required to do.
Okay.
My life never went in that direction, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
I loved all things like hospital dramas. I've always loved like Grey's Anatomy and Casualty and Holby City. I mean,
Right.
I was that kid at school that knew all about the human body, etc. So it's always fascinated me.
Okay.
So I was working in kind of corporate and media and all sorts of stuff, really kind of disheartening work I was doing, I'd say. It didn't have a
Okay.
purpose for me. And
Yeah.
so I said to a friend of mine at work once, I'm going to become a first aid instructor. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to teach people how to save people's lives. And particularly, I'm
Okay.
going to teach mums how to save their children's lives. And at the time, I didn't even have kids. But there was this
Right.
overwhelming urge for me to help mums, particularly. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because I lived in a women's
Wow.
refuge with my mum for years and years ago when I was tiny,
Okay.
due
Right.
to some, situation we had at home. And
Yeah.
it was with those mums in mind that I wanted to help because my mum didn't get any support
Right.
like that in that,
Yeah.
in that home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just kept thinking I need to support them. So I founded a CIC 14 years ago, which was
Right.
around physical first aid. But as a CIC, it was always around accessing those parents,
Yeah.
but utilizing the corporate lens, I guess, to be able to access them. So
Yeah.
we did that. And then I was working there for years and years and years. And then somebody, well, a friend of mine, Sarah Hughes, who's the chief exec of Mind, said to me at the time, because
Uh,
she was working at Mind locally, and said, you should go on this mental health first aid course. It's really interesting. I will put you through. So I
mm,
did, and I loved it. And I think it was at that
right.
moment I said, wow, this whole mental health conversation at the time, MHFA England, which is what it was
Yeah.
only servicing people in health and social care or mental health. It wasn't a corporate offering. It wasn't anything in the mainstream.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I really, really enjoyed doing that. So we're one of the first organisations to offer mental health first aid training alongside our
Wow.
physical first aid. And that's when I there was a light bulb moment for me. It was
Yeah.
like, wow, this whole lack of knowledge in communities is really,
Yeah.
really, really important.
Yeah.
And so arming people with skills around psychoeducation for me was really important.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what led me in a really weird winding path to where I am now.
That's the whole mental health first aid thing. I mean, you're so
Uh, oh,
right in terms of. I'm just going to plug in. Just bear me one
sorry.
sec, just in case my laptop switches off. Um, but you're so right. The whole like mental health first aid thing. I mean, it feels like it's been around for a long time, but you're right. It hasn't been, has it? It sort of
No.
started off with, St. John's Ambulance, and I remember all of that. But yeah, mental health first aid, really is relatively recent, given how problematic, or how much of an epidemic this area is and has been for quite a few years, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've just named the two big guns there, and that's who I first started first aid training with. I learned my trade at
Right.
St John Ambulance. Big up St
Right.
John, and obviously
Yes.
FA
Yeah.
England. So I learned from what I call the best in terms of
Yeah.
the industry.
Yeah.
Um,
Amazing.
yeah, and it's fascinating because I come on LinkedIn quite a lot. I don't post much, but I will try
Hmm.
from now on. But I don't
Hmm.
post much. But I do watch kind of comments and stuff about oh, MHFA is this or it doesn't do this and it doesn't. Of course it doesn't.
Yeah.
There is a service for all depending upon where you are in your journey. But mental health
Yeah.
first in England is certainly a massive help, even if it's just to understand from a a person-centered approach as to how you would potentially support
Yeah,
somebody in need. And
absolutely.
so, yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely got its space. Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. No, amazing. And just in case anybody is tuning in, because I know at the moment we're struggling to pull comments through. So if you're tuning in, just bear with in terms of the comments. But if you are watching live, please do say good morning. I'm going to keep an eye on my phone just in case, because I know that this technology is a little bit glitchy at the moment. So if you're watching live, please do say good morning, and we'll give you a bit of a shout out. Or if you've got any specific questions, because we are going to delve into obviously this whole topic of mental health, race, culture, and class. So Black Minds Matter. Tell us about Black Minds Matter, and the amazing work that you do, and how and why it started.
So Black Minds Matter was formed by two women as a fund after the killing of George Floyd and in the aftermath of that and the pandemic. It raised an amazing over £1 million, which was, donated by the wonderful community that we have, and not just Black-led organisations, right? It was everybody. It was Black Squares time. People were putting their hands in their pocket and supporting this cause. And as a result of that, BMM UK was formed as a fund. So in 2021, charity was set up in its place, and that is where we currently are. I've been in post for 18 months, first year as interim, to be able to scale, manage the complexities around scaling into a fully fledged charity. So that's where we are right now, and I'm in it. We are my permanent position here, and it has been the most enlightening and challenging and honorable position, that I could have ever taken. And for me, it's really important that we get that message across. So ultimately, it's about creating and championing safe and accessible mental health support for the Black community. That's our purpose, why we exist. And what we do is built around five values of our values, which are community, access, safety, healing, and change. And we did that as a higher group of people in our organization to try and figure out what we want to do, and that's what we want to do for the community. So it's specifically for us. It's about making sure it's accessible, and that means culturally competent and relevant, therapy for it's safe. When we talk about safety, we talk about therapy, and people go into these therapeutic spaces and they pour their guts out, and then something comes back to them, which means that they feel as if they shouldn't have done that. Like, I've now just exposed myself, and I thought you was going to help, and actually you just want to find out about my culture, or you want to find out about me, and it causes such difficulty. So it's all about keeping our community safe, healing. Now this one I could talk about for hours. Healing our community, right? And goodness knows there is a real need there.
And it's interesting, isn't it? One of the things that I sort of jotted down is this thing about, you talk about the fact that BMM UK started after the killing of George Floyd. There is something about the impact of some of those very public, big events that kind of happen, horrific events, etc. And obviously, 2020 was a very unique time anyway because of the pandemic. What are your thoughts on the impact of, when things like that happen? So when something like the George Floyd incident happened, but even stuff as, I don't want to say low level, but like when the football's on, and then say, for example, there's a penalty situation, and the Black players miss and they get totally like torn to shreds. What is the impact of things like that on the community? So in the service that you provide, which obviously is, free therapy, do you see those spikes? What is happening and why? What is the impact of like things of like social media and all of that sort of stuff? I don't know if you've got any theories about that.
Yes, big questions. Just to take you back to the first couple of points, things like the murder of George Floyd and back in the day, Rodney King and all of these situations and multiple others that have had these situations. There is a collective mourning and a collective outcry and a collective anger and and every Black person feels it. We talk about kind of generational. I think it is generational, but I also think there are community-wide moments, and I think that was definitely one of them. I personally felt despondent, despair, anger, all of those emotions that people had. And I think, you know, the founders at the time recognized that there was the whole community that felt like this, and wanted to help and support them to be able to give them space to talk it through and to, you know, cry and to help deal with those emotions, right? So the need for what BMM UK has always been there, because this behaviour has shown itself time and time again. I think what the pandemic did was allow so many people to see it, because we were locked down, and so many people to have uproar, and so many people to donate, that it became this thing. But, you know, let's be really clear, the causes behind this stuff is not new. That is not 2020. That is years and years and years, and my parents and grandparents, do you know what I mean? So the need for it, the mental health aspect of this stuff, or the impact of this stuff, is interesting, because actually some of the inquiries that we have are not necessarily about these really big moments in society. They're actually about their lived experience of living as a Black person in the UK. It's not these massive things that have caused this massive trauma. It's the lived experience of being Black in the UK, coupled or compounded with those events, which then cause, you know, what we call crisis, in, you know, in the community. So it's interesting. We don't get people that come through and go, oh, you know, the murder of George Floyd is really it's not that. Even though that has obviously compounded, it's actually, you know, well, this has happened at my organisation and I'm sick to death of it, and, you know, I can't cope with it anymore, or, you know, this is going on in my family, or whatever it may or may not be. But the overall lived experience of the Black person in the UK, the end results of what systemic racism, white supremacy within this country, we see the fallout of that. And what I found very fascinating when I first came was that you would have expected that people would have come in and go, right, I just need therapy. Thanks. And off they go. That's not the case. What happens is we have to trawl through some really difficult emails that are giving us a shot, or a lens into their life where challenges around class, culture, and race are impacting them, which then compound their mental health. They seek out for support. So it's a very complex set of challenges, which I believe is multi-layered and multifaceted.
Yeah. And part of the reason, you know, that, so obviously we've got this title here, Race, Class and Culture, because, and it, you know, I was kind of reminded of the Akala book. So when I was like thinking about like the title, you know, Akala, his book is, you know, it's called Natives, you know, and it's race and class, you know, and he deliberately kind of puts the two together, because there is something about, you know, race, but also then culture, class, deprivation, you know, all of that. And then, you know, you talked about obviously the working environment as well. So, you know, corporate, you know, and all of that, all of these things combined. And as you say, it is very multifaceted and multi-layered. One thing I want to just draw on, obviously part of what Black Minds Matter does is free therapy. And, you know, in terms of my experience of supporting family members, sometimes in crisis, I can attest to the, you know, that desire to kind of reach out to somebody that maybe understands some of the cultural nuance, you know, particularly when you, and then overlay something like religion, for example, you know, faith, right? So just talk to me about that in terms of why you, you know, why there is the importance to have therapists that understand the nuances of somebody's, you know, race, culture, class, you know, all of those elements of somebody's identity.
Yeah, representation. I think, you know, for me, it's about understanding that, and it was quite fascinating about this is just because your therapist is Black does not mean that there is going to be a connection there. You know, we are not, we're not a one
not
person,
a monolith.
Right? So we've got connections within those spaces, which are really important. So what we do at BMM is to make sure we match you with a therapist who matches your needs most. So if it was a Black woman from the Caribbean who has faith, we will try and match that person with that request, right? And you know, that's why I think it's also super important as a side is that we need as many therapists as we can to come forward, you know, to be able to help support this work. So it's really, really important that people see themselves in the person that they're speaking to. Because you then don't have to spend half of your very precious hour of your time explaining that part of your culture. So, for
Yeah.
example, you know, in certain, well, in my culture, when there is a death or when there is a bereavement, we band our bellies. You know, there is a night, you know, 9 nights. There are all of these things that are
Yeah.
culturally relevant to our community.
Yeah.
If you spoke to a therapist who perhaps does not understand that, inadvertently, what has sometimes happened is that therapist is very interested, very fascinated. So tell me more about that. Not from potentially a position of wanting to heal you, but potentially just more,
Yeah.
you know.
Just
And
to
it's
be
like, oh, okay,
educated. Yeah.
educated. And
Yeah.
the therapy space is not the place for educating
Yeah.
people who
Yeah.
want to learn more about our race and culture than other people, right? So it's really important that that
Yeah.
representation piece is met, but also
Yeah.
understanding and respecting that you know, we're not monolith, right? We do
Yeah.
have groups within groups that need to be serviced. So
Yeah. Yeah. And let's just talk a little bit about stigma and the role that stigma plays in, you know, the unhelpful role actually that stigma sometimes plays in terms of mental health and different forms of mental health, and whether or not, do you think that differs by race and culture? Do you think there are different elements of, you know, different levels of stigma that get in the way
I think,
of
do you know what? I think
the work?
stigma, sorry, one of those in my eye. Stigma is one of those words that means a lot to a lot of people, right? And we have stigma within our own communities, but the mental health conversations can come with stigma anyway, right? And I
Yeah.
think what's quite interesting about the word stigma is how it's perceived, you know, how your mental illness or your mental health challenge is perceived in communities, and therefore why we don't talk about them, because people may view us differently, or we don't talk
Yeah.
about those things, right? But when it comes to stigma, I've heard on this platform as well, you know, we don't talk about mental health enough. I'm like, yeah, we do. My opinion, this is probably why I don't post on it. we don't talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
do talk about mental health an awful lot. We talk about depression, and we talk about anxiety, and we talk, you know, you see these things that, or if I remember once I read something, and it wasn't actually on this platform, which I, you know, completely respect. I do love LinkedIn. It was on another platform, which I'm completely addicted to, which is really bad. And somebody had said, you know, oh, when I'm depressed, I just put some music on and jump around the house, you know, put some music on, and it lifts my mood. And I was kind of, what? Like, and somebody actually had written in the comments and said, you know, when I'm depressed, I can barely brush my teeth. And I was like,
Yeah.
see, I don't need to
Yeah.
be that person that comments
Yeah.
all the time, because people feel it. When it comes to looking at, you know, depression, anxiety, it doesn't tend to be much stigma there. So we talk about mental health. There's not much stigma when we talk about mental health.
Yeah.
You know, because everybody has their access points.
Yeah.
But when we talk about mental illness, that is a whole different conversation.
Exactly.
And mental illness is where there is still stigma. There is still stigma which completely paralyzes our communities, completely paralyzes our systems, everything. And that's the conversation that's not spoken about.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll challenge people when they say, don't talk about mental health enough. Yeah, we do talk about it, it's great, but we don't talk about mental illness.
Yeah.
That's where the stigma lies, in my mind.
Yeah. And do you think, and I totally agree. There's almost like the acceptable side, you know, the acceptable part of the spectrum that you can talk about. In terms of mental illness or mental ill health, do you think that, I mean, do you think there is a difference within different communities and cultures around the stigma, or actually, do you think it's the same? I mean, I have a view, but I'm interested to hear what your view is
I think
first
that
in terms of the level of stigma.
when we talk about this stuff, it's what I call your qualitative outcomes, your data versus your numbers and your stats.
Yeah.
Because we have statistics, Black women are more likely to experience common mental illness, Black men are more likely to experience psychosis, Black people are 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But we know that more white people are treated for mental health difficulties.
Yeah.
We know that to be true.
Yeah.
I can't talk on behalf of other communities about how stigmatized it might be in their own communities. I have experience of speaking to individuals, like, you know, on the courses I used to deliver, and in my work now, where people, oh, you know, auntie's diagnosed with schizophrenia, no one speaks to her, you know, it's that kind of thing, but very, very hush hush. So I can't with confidence say that the stigma isn't the same depending upon your race. I can only talk about our own experiences, right? And within our own experiences, the stigma still stands.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And so here's I've kind of got an unproven hypothesis, which is that the stigma around mental illness, and particularly, there's this term serious mental illness, as in, things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and, other sort of like serious personality disorders. I've kind of got a theory that that the stigma actually is probably quite similar across. Certainly, say if we look at, say, the Western world, the UK, US, Canada, Australia, the Anglo kind of countries. I've almost got a view that actually the stigma is quite similar. And I sort of landed on this hypothesis, this unproven hypothesis, based on listening to one Radio 4 program the one day where there was a guy talking about back in like the 60s or 70s. He was an undercover cop, and had been undercover for a couple of years, and it had taken a massive toll on his mental health, to the point where he was experiencing psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, and whatever. Went to see a psychiatrist and was diagnosed with depression. And he said, reflecting back, he was like, that definitely was not depression. It probably was, schizophrenia or bipolar or something. And I sort of thought, isn't that interesting? And I thought, is there a stigma in, say, for example, certain communities and classes, whereby if somebody comes in from a certain background, maybe the stigma is such that we don't actually diagnose people from those backgrounds with those very serious mental illnesses, right? And that's maybe how it shows up for different communities. Whereas it might be, oh, it's a black man that comes in that's got a history of X, Y, and Z. Oh, it's schizophrenia. Oh, it's that, and maybe, is the health system potentially quicker to diagnose some of those more stigmatized, serious, and I don't know what the truth is, because you'd have to really dig into the stats. But I do wonder, actually, is the stigma the same? I know we think that the stigma is more in Black and brown communities, but I just do wonder whether that is actually the case.
Oh, interesting. So I again, meeting people from all different cultures and backgrounds, and I've heard experiences of really difficult mental health challenges, right? Life-changing, life-altering mental illness. I believe genuinely that that mental health does not discriminate in any way, shape, or form. Mental health difficulties, mental illness does not discriminate. It can't, right? But the systems which we operate in are the ones that then discriminate or add, layers to those diagnosis pathways. And then you've got biases and unconscious biases. But when I think about this particular question, what came to mind was my husband and my daughter and I are watching Masters of the Air. So it's Masters of the Air, it's this high production TV program about World War II, I think it was. And it's very, very high glossy and very well shot. And you're watching it, and it's quite low level. I mean, it's talking about war, etc. So it's really difficult. And there's some really interesting conversations that happen off of the back of watching it. And then you're watching the other one, and it's quite horrific. Anyway, to cut long story short, the reason why I think it's pertinent to this piece of conversation is because those people that came back out from the war, and I remember watching some of them at the end, these are old men now who were crying their eyes out, saying, you saw your friends being killed, and all things that we've gone through as human beings have affected our mental health, all of it. This is why I talk about, we can't, stigma isn't just for one, because those people were shut down when they came back to their countries. We didn't talk about them. Psychiatric units, hospitals, inpatient units and hospitals. Everyone was kept quiet. You didn't ban them people about like you did with everybody else when they came back with the flags. Yay! They all this masculine, front of people who came back and beat whoever it was at the time. But there was a set of people who were broken people in hospital, mute, could not speak, PTSD, all of these things. You didn't see it because it wasn't what people wanted you to see. So for me, all around, as we've kind of evolved in our humanity, our mental health is something that has been affected and will continue to be affected by these outside challenges that we have. And can't
Definitely. There's a couple of comments here. As I was saying, the technology means that the comments aren't coming through, so apologies, I can't display them. But a comment from Safia, so Safia Griffin, who is a skills trainer. So she says there is definitely a double stigma within the community and from institutional racism / ethnic stereotypes. And then Layla has added on, I did my master's thesis on the stigma of mental illness in social media and the construction of social identity. My research showed that intersectionality plays an important role in mental illness, where people who are already discriminated against by race, poverty, etc., are the ones who receive most of the stigma. My research was conducted in the Brazilian social context, which is really interesting. Yeah, no, thank you so much for those comments. It is incredibly complex, and I know you touched on the pathways, the treatment pathways, which again, you know, and I just wish there was more research around this, but you know, there's been research around the lack of treatment, which then results in more of certain types of individuals ending up in crisis, right? And we all know about the statistics of, you know, horrific you know, sort of like deaths and all kinds of things that have happened because of, you know, individuals you know, not getting the care that they needed, etc. So that's like a whole nother rabbit hole that unfortunately we don't have time to go down into today, but it is incredibly complex. Let's just get on to one of the things that you mentioned was you know, the impact of the workplace and some of the challenges you know, that people face just in their everyday life. Obviously we've moved now to a situation where, you know, a lot more people are working from home and things have just changed. I just want to get your thoughts about, you know, if you think from sort of like 2020 up to now in terms of where people are and work, etc. Do you think things are improving? Are things getting worse? Is it the same? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? And this is, we're wrapping up now, but you know, I know I've opened another can of worms.
You have. Yeah, because and just to go back, thank you so much for those comments. Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that somebody talked about intersectionality. You cannot have conversations around this subject without taking that into consideration. So thank you for those comments.
Yeah.
The workplace, has it got any better? Who knows, right? I mean, who knows? You will have people that will say categorically no, it hasn't. You've got, you know, organizations that bought in after the killing of George Floyd, these massive pieces of work around looking at the systems and breaking up the power dynamics and bringing in these heads of, you know, EDI, and we're going to have this, that, and the other. And I see personally that these positions have been made redundant now, you know, and these are really, really difficult situations that are hard for the Black community to go, oh, okay, thanks. Because 4 years ago, it was really important, you wanted to change, but now 4 years on, that's no longer, you know, on your radar. So it's disheartening and it's difficult. That would probably play into that whole idea about, no, it hasn't got any better, right? But at the same time, you have more people understanding and getting involved in conversations and taking things like ERGs, right? I'd like to say a massive shout out to all of the ERGs that have supported Black Minds Matter UK. We will never be one of those organisations, unfortunately, where we can be the charity of the year. I don't ever see that happening, because those massive organisations would find it difficult to support a charity that specifically looks after one demographic within the UK. But our ERGs do, and they hold us up and they say, do you know what, if we're going to be fundraising, we're going to be fundraising for Black Minds Matter. Because we recognise their support. That is not to say that we cannot and do not want the support of our allies, because there are people out there, I genuinely do believe, in terms of holding from a position of hope, that there are people within this country that want to see more equitable playing field. I have to hold that. I keep, you know, I want to keep holding that, right? So if that's the case, what does it look like? How can we start to understand the impact of the work that it is that we do? So I can't answer that, Cheryl, and it's probably a roundabout way of kind of getting there, but it's a really difficult subject.
Yeah, it is a difficult one. And I think, I mean, you know, all of the things that you said in terms of, you know, the role that, you know, ED&I has played, and then we've got the employee resource groups and employee networks. I think I am a Pollyanna. So I think, interestingly, something like, if I take an example, right, we're in football, and we know what has happened in the past when, for example, the black players have like missed the penalties or whatever. What I'm heartened by, and I'm not a massive football fan, but I'm heartened by the fact that so many more people seem to be aware of it. So even on LinkedIn, the amount of posts about it, the amount of posts commented on by people from all, races, all genders, etc., talking about, gosh, I was so nervous at the penalties because I don't want to see a repeat of. Like, to me, that is progress. Now, at the same time, I'm not completely naive. I know that there is a backlash. I know that there is a worrying political trend towards the right, and I see all of that. So I almost see, I see an increase in the awareness around the disparities and health inequalities and all of that sort of thing. I see the awareness, but I also see people, sort of clinging on to the systems and the powers that create those disparities and those inequalities. Do you know what I mean? So I'm kind of torn, I guess, right?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. It is all good and well, all of those people kind of who work and live in the receiving end of these systems, but the people that control those systems are the only ones that can do that work to be able to exact real change, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of systemic and institutional challenges. But there is also that, that little bit of me that goes, well, why would you want to give up power? Why? If it serves you, right? So there is that part. But then I don't think about that too much, because I'm then drawn away from hope and progress.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Okay, and then as we wrap up, and hasn't the time gone quickly? Too quickly. We haven't even touched on. I feel, there's so much that we could have talked about, especially around the kind of the intersectionality piece, because we didn't even touch on things. We touched briefly on the intersection of faith and race, but we didn't even touch on, for example, things like, other marginalized identity, like even, for example, sexual orientation. So like when I think about like maybe the black queer community or the black trans community, I mean, that's like a whole nother layer of, kind of like oppression and sort of discrimination, etc., which affects then mental health outcomes. But just as we're leaving, apart from, I would encourage anybody, especially, if you are part of an employee network, particularly for your, race and culture, and you haven't heard of Black Minds Matter UK, where have you been? You must have been living under a rock. You definitely need to be connecting with Danielle and checking out Black Minds Matter and the work that they do. And there are other groups as well that focus on specific demographics. I know I'm aware of, I think there's a Sikh group, and there are some other groups as well. So yeah, if you are looking after a race and ethnicity employee network, there are organizations that understand that when it comes to this work, there is a benefit in having therapists, psychiatrists, etc., that understand the nuances of different race, ethnicities, cultures, and the other intersections. So please do check out that work. Where else can people find and connect with you? You said that you're not on LinkedIn that much, right? So let's just give you a pass. Are you more on Instagram? Is that the channel that you're on?
I'm really glad you brought this up, because I can use this as my kind of
yeah. Where are you mainly? Where can people connect with you mainly?
Right. So I on here. So please do connect with me here on LinkedIn. And I do come on. I'm more of a looker than a kind of
stalker. You like a.
I love listening to people's stories. I love the posts that people have. I'm very busy, but I want to be able to contribute more. So I will, and this is my moment, I will be contributing more in terms of, comments, etc., about the work we do on LinkedIn. There you go. Great. But I am also found on Instagram, and that's that one's, I like that too, probably too much. In terms of challenges, etc., that ERGs can do for us in terms of fundraising, fantastic. Corporates can book us to deliver talks, like you've mentioned. Support our work, come and find out what we're doing. We can always be found on our website, which is www.blackmindsmatteruk.com, where you can also donate. And it's been an absolute pleasure being here today, Cheryl. Thank you.
Amazing. No, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And for everybody that was watching live as well, and for those that have commented, thank you so much for your comments. We'll go back in and connect with you. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you for taking some time out of your day to watch this conversation, and any thoughts and feedback that you've got, we'd love to have those. So Danielle, thank you so much again for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And everyone that's watching live, have an amazing weekend. Take care, guys. Bye. Go with Grace.